There are some places that hit you the moment you arrive, and then there are places that don't. Colonial Williamsburg was the second kind for us. By the time my son and I arrived in Williamsburg during our 2015 road trip, we'd already spent days walking through Washington, D.C. We'd climbed stairs, toured museums, crossed battlefields, and worn ourselves completely out. We were running on excitement, sore feet, and stubborn determination. After checking out of our hotel near Arlington, we made the 4-hour drive south. Somewhere near Williamsburg, we stopped for lunch at Golden Corral, stretched our legs, and prepared ourselves for what we thought would be another full day of exploration. What we didn't realize was that exhaustion would become part of this story too. And in a strange way, that ended up helping me understand Williamsburg better. Because this is a place that spent nearly 150 years quietly resting while the world moved on around it. A city that was once one of the most important places in America, and then suddenly, it wasn't. For 81 years, Williamsburg served as the capital of colonial Virginia. Today that might not sound like a big deal, but colonial Virginia was the largest, wealthiest, and most influential of Britain's American colonies. Before there was a United States, Virginia was one of the centers of political power in North America, and Williamsburg was its beating heart. The city was carefully planned in 1699. At one end stood the College of William and Mary. At the other stood the Capitol. Between them stretched Duke of Gloucester Street, a long avenue where lawmakers, merchants, students, craftsmen, and everyday citizens crossed paths. This was where ideas were debated, where policies were written, where the future of an emerging nation slowly began to take shape. Patrick Henry delivered some of his most famous speeches here. Thomas Jefferson studied nearby. Future presidents, governors, military leaders, and revolutionaries walked these streets. Long before independence was declared in Philadelphia, the seeds of revolution were already being planted in Williamsburg. As we entered the historic district, though, none of that was the first thing on my mind. Honestly, I was tired. My son was tired. And both of us were moving much slower than we had earlier in the trip. One of our first stops was a small shop where we bought homemade bottled root beer. To this day, I still remember how good it tasted. Maybe it was the quality. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was simply that we'd spent a week living out of hotels and fast food stops. Whatever the reason, it felt like one of those little road trip moments that sticks with you long after you've forgotten the bigger details. Those small moments are often the ones I remember best. Not the famous landmarks, not the brochures, just sharing a root beer with my son while wandering through a historic town. As we continued exploring, we came across an old cemetery, and that's where Williamsburg surprised me. Many of the historic grave markers had been laid flat into walkways and pathways. People walked across them without even realizing it. Some markers were even incorporated into the flooring inside the church. I remember standing there feeling uncomfortable. Maybe it's because I spend so much time in old cemeteries now. Maybe it's because I've always believed the dead deserve a certain amount of respect. Whatever the reason, it bothered me. I found myself looking down more than up, reading names, wondering about lives, thinking about how easily people can become part of the landscape when enough time passes. And maybe that's fitting for Williamsburg, because in many ways the city itself became part of the landscape of American history. After the Revolutionary War began, Williamsburg's location became a problem. The city sat on a vulnerable peninsula between the James and York rivers. British forces could potentially reach it by water, making it difficult to defend. So in 1780, Governor Thomas Jefferson supported moving Virginia's capital inland to Richmond. The decision made sense, but the consequences were enormous. Almost overnight, Williamsburg lost its purpose. The politicians left, the money left, the influence left. The city that had once shaped colonial policy suddenly found itself watching history happen somewhere else. Most places respond to decline by rebuilding or reinventing themselves. Williamsburg simply slowed down. For generation after generation, very little changed. And that turned out to be one of the greatest accidents in American history. Because while other cities modernized, Williamsburg remained largely frozen in time. The very thing that hurt the city economically helped preserve it historically. As we explored some of the homes and farm areas, I found myself thinking about those generations who watched the city fade from prominence. The houses felt lived in, not grand, not flashy, just real. Places where ordinary people woke up, worked, raised families, worried about bills, and hoped tomorrow would be a little better than today. One of my favorite moments happened during our house tour. While I wandered around taking photographs, my son sat down with one of the interpreters and started playing checkers. There was no schedule, no rush, no lecture, just a simple game between two people separated by centuries of history. I don't even remember who won, but I remember looking over and smiling. Trips are full of famous moments, the monuments, the museums, the historic sites. But when I look back now, it's often moments like that one that mean the most. Watching my son completely immersed in a place without even realizing it. History isn't always learned through facts. Sometimes it's learned through experience. Eventually, we toured the Governor's Palace, one of Williamsburg's most iconic landmarks. The original palace burned in 1781, but what visitors see today is part of one of the most ambitious historic restoration projects ever attempted. In the 1920s, Reverend W.A.R. Goodwin convinced John D. Rockefeller Jr. to help save Williamsburg. What followed was extraordinary. Researchers searched archives across multiple countries. Historic buildings were restored. Lost structures were reconstructed. Entire sections of the town were transformed back into their colonial appearance. Today, Colonial Williamsburg is often called the world's largest living history museum. And standing here, it's easy to understand why. You're not looking at a single preserved building. You're walking through an entire community. A place where you can see how people lived, worked, governed, worshipped, and dreamed. Of course, by that point, my body had other priorities. At one point, I sat down to rest and immediately got bitten by a horsefly. And if you've ever been bitten by a horsefly, you know that's less of a bite and more of a personal attack. That thing hurt. My ankles were swollen, my feet were protesting, my son looked just as exhausted as I felt. We had reached the point where the trip was no longer competing with our energy level. It had defeated it completely. So we called it a day. The next morning we faced a choice. Go back into Colonial Williamsburg or admit we were done. For once, we chose honesty. We spent a couple of hours relaxing by the hotel pool instead. No museums, no schedules, no pressure. Just a chance to breathe. And that's when we realized something important. We loved Williamsburg, but we weren't going to appreciate it properly in the condition we were in. So rather than forcing ourselves through another day, we decided to save it for another trip. Then we packed up and headed home a day early. Somewhere around Daytona Beach, Florida, I started getting sleepy enough to worry about staying awake. A Mountain Dew came to the rescue, and we pushed through the final miles. We finally pulled into the driveway around 10 or 11 that night and went straight to bed. Completely exhausted, completely happy, and eager to do it all again someday. Because Williamsburg matters for the same reason road trips matter. Both remind us that the journey is bigger than any single destination. Williamsburg preserved something incredibly rare. Not just buildings, not just artifacts, an entire world. The streets where revolution was discussed. The taverns where ideas spread. The halls where leaders debated the future of a nation that didn't exist yet. It survived because it was forgotten. And because it was forgotten, we can still experience it today. If you've ever visited Colonial Williamsburg, I'd love to hear what stayed with you most. Was it a building? A conversation? A quiet moment somewhere along Duke of Gloucester Street? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the stories hidden behind historic places, consider subscribing and joining us on future journeys. Because sometimes the places that change history aren't the places that win. Sometimes they're the places that survive. And Williamsburg survived long enough to let the rest of us walk through time.